I was 62 when my daughter left me at that hotel after the worst fight we ever had. I stood there, alone in a city I didn't even know the name of, with a small suitcase and a dead phone, not enough money to get home. In that moment, I thought I had lost her forever. I never thought I'd be standing in the middle of a strange town at 62 years old, clutching a small suitcase with shaking hands and watching my daughter's rental car disappear around the corner like my entire world was crumbling with it. The hotel room key felt cold and foreign in my palm. Room 237. That's where everything fell apart just 30 minutes ago. That's where Sarah finally said what she'd been holding back for years, her voice cutting through me like broken glass. "You never listen, Mom. You never have. You just talk at me, control me, judge me, and then wonder why I don't call." The door slammed so hard the cheap hotel artwork rattled against the wall. My phone was dead. Of course it was dead. I'd forgotten to pack the charger, too focused on packing what I thought would make this mother-daughter reconciliation trip perfect. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, the woman who had organized every detail of everyone else's life for decades, and I couldn't even keep my own phone charged. The lobby felt different now, empty and echoing. The cheerful floral wallpaper that had seemed quaint an hour ago now looked faded and desperate. The elderly clerk behind the desk kept glancing at me with those pitying eyes that made my chest tighten with embarrassment. I'd been standing here for 20 minutes, trying to figure out what to do next. Sarah was supposed to drive us back to Chicago tomorrow. We were supposed to have dinner tonight at that little Italian place she'd found online. We were supposed to talk, really talk, for the first time in months. Instead, she was probably already halfway to the interstate, her jaw set in that stubborn way she'd inherited from me, her hands gripping the steering wheel like she was trying to strangle it. I should have seen this coming. The signs were all there during our first day here in Millbrook. The way she'd gone quiet when I suggested we visit 3 different antique shops instead of just wandering around like she wanted. The way her smile had gotten tighter each time I corrected the server at lunch or reorganized the hotel room to make it more efficient. The way she'd stared out the window with that distant look I remembered from her teenage years. But I kept pushing. God help me. I kept pushing because I thought I knew what was best. I thought if I could just show her how much better things could be if she'd listen to my advice about her job, her apartment, her dating life. Maybe we could finally bridge this gap that had been widening between us for years. The breaking point came when she mentioned wanting to take a pottery class. Something about finding a creative outlet, exploring art again like she used to in college. Instead of encouraging her, I immediately launched into a lecture about practical hobbies, about how she should focus on advancing her career instead of wasting time on crafts that wouldn't pay the bills. "You always do this," she'd said, her voice getting that dangerous quiet tone. "I tell you something that makes me happy, and you immediately explain why I'm wrong to want it. I'm just trying to help you make smart choices, honey. You know how hard it is to..." "No, Mom. You're trying to turn me into the person you think I should be, instead of loving the person I actually am." That's when the dam broke. Years of resentment came pouring out of her like water through a cracked foundation. Every time I'd criticized her choices, every relationship I'd questioned, every dream I'd dismissed as impractical. She laid it all out in brutal detail while I stood there, stunned and defensive, my mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. I tried to explain. I tried to tell her that everything I'd done came from love, from wanting to protect her from the mistakes I'd made. But she wasn't listening anymore. She was already throwing her clothes into her bag, her movements sharp and angry. "I can't do this anymore," she'd said without looking at me. "I thought maybe we could fix things, but you haven't changed at all. You're still the same person who made me feel like nothing I did was ever good enough." The sound of her suitcase zipper closing was like a period at the end of a sentence I wasn't ready to finish. Now, here I was, alone in a town I'd never heard of before yesterday, with barely enough cash for a few meals and nowhere near enough for a bus ticket home. My credit card would work, but I'd maxed it out last month helping Sarah with her security deposit. Another attempt to fix her life that had backfired spectacularly. I walked outside, hoping the fresh air might clear my head. The main street of Millbrook stretched out before me like something from a postcard. Tree-lined sidewalks, old-fashioned street lamps, little shops with hand-painted signs. Under different circumstances, I might have found it charming. Right now, it just felt alien and intimidating. The smell of coffee and something sweet drifted from a small cafe across the street. My stomach growled, reminding me that I'd been too nervous to eat much lunch. I checked my wallet again. $43 and some change. Not enough to get home, but enough for coffee and maybe a sandwich while I figured out my next move. The cafe was warm and inviting, with mismatched wooden tables and local artwork on the walls. A few customers sat quietly, some reading newspapers, others tapping away at laptops. Normal people living normal lives, none of them stranded and abandoned by their only child. "What can I get you, dear?" The woman behind the counter was probably my age, with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands. Her voice had that musical quality that comes from spending your whole life in a small town where everyone knows everyone. "Just coffee, please." "Black." I fumbled with my wallet, suddenly self-conscious about my appearance. Had I been crying? My reflection in the window showed smeared mascara and hair that looked like I'd been running my hands through it. "You okay, honey? You look a little lost." The kindness in her voice nearly broke me. I blinked rapidly, trying to keep the tears at bay. "I'm fine. Just having a tough day." She studied my face for a moment, then poured the coffee without charging me. "First one's on the house. You sit wherever you like and take all the time you need." I found a corner table where I could watch the street and try to think clearly. The coffee was strong and bitter, exactly what I needed. As I sipped it, I started making a mental list of my options. Call my sister in Phoenix and ask her to wire money for a bus ticket. Explain the whole humiliating situation to her. Endure her "I told you so" lecture about being too controlling with Sarah. Option 2, find the cheapest motel in town and wait until Monday when the bank's opened, then figure out how to access my savings account without my phone for the security codes. Neither option felt appealing. Both involved admitting defeat, calling for rescue, proving that I was exactly as helpless as Sarah seemed to think I was. A help wanted sign in the cafe window caught my eye. Experienced housekeeper needed at Mountain View Inn. Temporary position, immediate start. I stared at it for a long moment. An crazy idea beginning to form in my mind. What if I didn't run home with my tail between my legs? What if I stayed here, earned enough money to get back on my own terms, proved to myself and to Sarah that I was more capable than either of us had given me credit for? The logical part of my brain immediately started listing all the reasons this was a terrible idea. I'd never worked in hospitality. I'd never cleaned anything more challenging than my own house. I didn't know anyone here, didn't understand the local customs or expectations. But underneath the fear was something else. Something that felt almost like excitement. When was the last time I'd done something unexpected? Something that scared me a little? When had I last taken a risk that was just for me, not calculated to help or improve someone else's life? I walked back to the counter where the kind woman was wiping down equipment. "That help wanted sign," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Do you know anything about the position?" She looked up with interest. "You thinking about applying?" "It's at my brother's place, the Mountain View Inn. He's been struggling since his wife died last year. Their regular housekeeper just moved to Florida to be closer to her grandkids." "What kind of experience are they looking for?" "Honestly, at this point, he'd probably hire anyone willing to work hard and treat his guests with respect. It's not fancy work, mind you. Cleaning rooms, changing sheets, helping serve breakfast sometimes. But Tom's fair, and he provides room and board for live-in help." Room and board. That changed everything. I wouldn't need money for a motel or restaurants. I could actually make this work, at least temporarily. "Would you mind calling him for me? I know it sounds strange, but I'm in a bit of a situation and I really need the work." She studied my face again, and I could see her taking in the expensive handbag, the well-tailored clothes, the manicured nails that marked me as someone who'd never done manual labor in her life. But instead of skepticism, I saw understanding. We all find ourselves in situations we never expected, honey. Let me give Tom a call." While she dialed, I looked out the window at the small town that might become my temporary home. The late afternoon sun was painting everything golden, and I could hear music drifting from somewhere nearby. Someone was playing guitar, a slow and melancholy tune that seemed to match my mood perfectly. My reflection stared back at me from the window glass. 62 years old, gray hair that I'd been dyeing brown for the past decade, lines around my eyes that spoke of too much worry and not enough laughter. Sarah's words echoed in my memory. "You're still the same person who made me feel like nothing I did was ever good enough." Maybe she was right. Maybe I hadn't changed at all. But maybe, just maybe, that was about to change. The cafe owner hung up the phone and turned back to me with a smile. "Tom says if you can be there in an hour, he'll talk to you about the job. The inn's just a 10-minute walk down Main Street, can't miss it. Big blue Victorian with a wraparound porch." "Thank you," I managed, suddenly overwhelmed by the generosity of a stranger. "I don't even know your name." Betty Morrison. "And you are?" "Margaret. Margaret Walsh." I hesitated, then added, "I have a feeling my life is about to get very interesting." Betty laughed, a warm sound that filled the whole cafe. "Honey, interesting is just another word for alive. You go show my brother what you're made of." As I walked toward the door, suitcase in hand, I caught my reflection one more time. The same face, the same gray hair, the same worry lines. But something in my eyes looked different. Something that might have been hope or determination, or maybe just the first stirring of courage I'd felt in years. The music was louder now, and I could see a young man sitting on the inn's front porch with a guitar. He looked up as I approached, and I wondered what he saw. A lost middle-aged woman running away from her problems, or someone finally brave enough to run toward something new. I guess I was about to find out. The Mountain View Inn was more beautiful than I'd expected, but also more intimidating. The blue Victorian house rose 3 stories high, with gingerbread trim that looked like it needed fresh paint, and a wraparound porch that sagged slightly on one side. Flower boxes overflowed with petunias and marigolds, their bright colors almost defiant against the worn wood siding. It was the kind of place that could either charm you or overwhelm you, depending on your state of mind. The young man with the guitar looked up as I climbed the porch steps, his fingers still moving absently over the strings. He had dark hair that curled at his collar, and eyes that seemed older than his maybe 18 years. "You hear about the job?" he asked, his voice carrying a slight accent I couldn't place. "How did you know?" He gestured toward my suitcase with a crooked smile. "Lucky guess. Plus, Aunt Betty called ahead. I'm Miguel, by the way. Tom's grandson." Before I could respond, the front door opened and a man emerged who had to be Tom. He was shorter than I'd expected, probably in his early 60s, with silver hair and hands that looked like they'd built half the town. His face had the weathered quality of someone who'd spent most of his life outdoors, but his eyes were gentle. "You must be Margaret," he said, extending a calloused hand. "Betty says you're looking for work." "I am." I shook his hand, grateful that my voice sounded steadier than I felt. "I know I don't look like typical housekeeping staff, but I'm a hard worker, and I learn fast." Tom studied me for a moment, taking in my expensive clothes and obviously manicured appearance. I waited for him to politely decline, to suggest I try the bank or the real estate office instead, but he just nodded toward 2 rocking chairs at the far end of the porch. "Why don't we sit and talk? Miguel, go tell your mama we'll be ready for dinner in about 20 minutes. As we settled into the chairs, I found myself looking out over the town spread below us. From this height, I could see the main street with its mix of old storefronts and newer businesses, the small park with its gazebo, and beyond that, rolling hills covered in trees that were just beginning to show hints of fall color. It was peaceful in a way that Chicago never was, even in the quietest neighborhoods. "So," Tom said, his voice pulling me back to the moment, "what brings a woman like you to a job like this?" I'd rehearsed several answers walking over here. each one designed to make me sound more capable and less desperate than I actually was. But something about Tom's direct gaze made me want to tell the truth. My daughter and I had a fight. A bad one. She left me here with no way to get home and not enough money for a bus ticket. The words came out in a rush, and I immediately felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment. I know how that sounds. It sounds honest, Tom said quietly. What did you fight about? I stared at my hands, noticing how soft and useless they looked compared to his. Everything. Nothing. The way I've been trying to control her life for the past 30 years. The way I can't seem to love her without trying to fix her. Tom was quiet for a long moment, and I could hear Miguel's guitar from somewhere inside the house. The melody sad and complicated. Finally, Tom spoke. My wife Elena used to say that the hardest part of loving someone is learning when to hold on and when to let go. She sounds wise. She was. Cancer took her 14 months ago. His voice didn't waver, but I could see the grief still fresh in his eyes. She ran this place for 23 years, made it feel like home for thousands of guests. I've been trying to keep it going, but I'm better with fixing things than I am with taking care of people. Is that why you need help? Part of it. The other part is that my daughter Carmen just moved back home with Miguel after her divorce. She's trying to find her footing again, and I thought maybe having some help here would let her focus on getting her life back together. I felt a pang of recognition. Another complicated family dynamic. Another parent trying to do right by an adult child who might not want the help. Where is Carmen now? In the kitchen, probably burning dinner. Tom's smile was rueful. Elena tried to teach her to cook for years, but Carmen was always more interested in books than recipes. Now she's determined to master every dish in Elena's recipe collection. It's not going well. As if summoned by his words, a woman appeared in the doorway. She was probably in her 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail and an apron covered in what looked like tomato sauce. She had Tom's gentle eyes but carried herself with the careful posture of someone who'd been knocked down recently and was still testing whether she was steady on her feet. "Dad, I think I need help," she said, then noticed me. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you had company. Carmen, this is Margaret. She's here about the housekeeping position." Carmen's eyes widened slightly as she took in my appearance, the same reaction I'd gotten from Betty and Tom. "Have you worked in hospitality before?" "No," I admitted. "But I've run a household for 30 years, and I supervised a staff of 12 at my last office job. I know how to organize, how to pay attention to details, and how to make people feel welcome." It wasn't entirely true. I'd been an administrative assistant, not a supervisor, but I had trained new employees and coordinated office events. "Close enough to count," I told myself. "We have 8 guest rooms," Tom said. "Usually about half full during the week, more on weekends. Checkout is at 11, check-in at 3. That gives you 4 hours to clean and prepare the rooms. Carmen handles breakfast and manages the front desk. I take care of maintenance and grounds. Miguel helps when he's not in school." "What about pay?" $200 a week plus room and board. Rooms on the 3rd floor, small but private. Meals with the family, 1 day off per week." Tom paused. "It's not much money." It was less than I'd made in 2 days at my old job, but it included everything I needed to survive. More importantly, it was a chance to prove something to myself, even if I wasn't sure what that something was yet. "When would I start?" "Tomorrow morning if you want the job. We've got 5 rooms checking out, 3 checking in. Carmen can show you the ropes." I looked at Carmen, who was studying me with obvious curiosity. "Are you okay with this? Training someone with no experience?" Carmen's laugh was short but not unkind. "Honestly, I'm drowning here. Dad's great with the business side, but he doesn't understand that clean towels don't magically appear in the linen closet, and food doesn't cook itself. If you're willing to learn, I'm willing to teach." "Then I accept." Tom stood and extended his hand again. "Welcome to the Mountain View Inn, Margaret. Miguel will show you to your room. Dinner's in 30 minutes, assuming Carmen doesn't burn the house down." "I heard that," Carmen called from the doorway, but she was smiling. Miguel appeared with my suitcase before I could protest that I could carry it myself. "Room's up here," he said. leading me through the front door into a lobby that managed to be both elegant and homey. Antique furniture mixed with comfortable-looking sofas, and the walls were covered with local artwork and old photographs of the inn through the decades. The staircase was narrow and creaked with each step, but the banister was smooth and solid under my hand. Miguel chattered as we climbed, pointing out family photos and explaining the inn's history. His grandfather had bought it in the 1970s when it was nearly falling down, spent decades restoring it with Elena's help. "She died in the room right below yours," Miguel said as we reached the third floor. "Not in a creepy way," he added quickly. "She was sick for a long time, and she wanted to be here instead of the hospital. Said this place had too much love in it for anyone to be truly sad here." My room was at the end of a short hallway, small but clean with a sloped ceiling that followed the roofline. A single window looked out over the backyard, where I could see a vegetable garden and what looked like the beginnings of an herb garden. The furniture was simple but well made. A single bed with a colorful quilt, a small dresser, a desk and chair. "Bathrooms right across the hall," Miguel said. "You'll be sharing with guests sometimes when we're full, but mostly it's just you up here." After he left, I sat on the bed and tried to process what I'd just committed to. 24 hours ago, I'd been Margaret Walsh, administrative assistant from Chicago, woman whose biggest worry was whether Sarah would like the restaurant I'd picked for dinner. Now I was Margaret Walsh, live-in housekeeper in a small town I'd never heard of, about to learn skills I'd never needed, and live with a family I'd just met. My reflection in the small mirror above the dresser looked shell-shocked. The expensive blouse had a small stain on the collar. My hair was escaping its careful style, and my makeup had mostly worn off. For the first time in years, I looked my age. A knock on the door interrupted my self-examination. "Margaret, dinner's ready." Carmen's voice was tentative, as if she wasn't sure I hadn't changed my mind and climbed out the window. The dining room was cozy, with a round table that looked like it had hosted thousands of family meals. The smell of something Italian filled the air, and despite Carmen's worries about her cooking, my stomach growled appreciatively. Tom was already seated, having changed from his work clothes into a clean shirt. Miguel had put away his guitar and was setting out plates with the easy familiarity of someone who'd done this job many times. Carmen emerged from the kitchen carrying a casserole dish, her apron now sporting even more stains. "It's supposed to be lasagna," she announced, setting it down with a slight grimace. "But I think I used salt instead of sugar in the sauce, and maybe too much oregano." Elena's handwriting was never very clear. I took a bite and tried not to wince. It was pretty terrible, oversalted and overwhelmingly herbal. But the effort was there, and the love behind it was unmistakable. "It's fine," I said diplomatically. "Maybe next time we could cook together? I make a decent marinara sauce." Carmen's face lit up with relief and gratitude. "Would you? I've been trying to master Elena's recipes for months, but I keep making disasters. Miguel's been living on peanut butter sandwiches." "It's not that bad, Mom," Miguel said loyally, though he was picking around the oregano-heavy sections. "You're sweet, but you're also a terrible liar." Carmen turned back to me. "Elena left behind dozens of recipes, but they're all written like she expected the cook to already know what she was thinking. Add spices to taste doesn't help when you don't know what it's supposed to taste like." As we talked, I found myself relaxing for the first time since Sarah had walked out of that hotel room. The conversation flowed naturally, touching on the inn's history, the town's quirks, Miguel's music. No one asked probing questions about my past, or made me feel like I had to justify my presence here. Tom talked about the challenges of running a small business in an increasingly digital world. Carmen shared stories about her life in Denver and the marriage that had slowly fallen apart over 5 years. Miguel played us a song he'd been working on, his fingers sure and confident on the guitar strings. It struck me that this was what I'd been trying to create with Sarah for years. Easy conversation, shared interests, the comfortable intimacy of people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. But every dinner with Sarah had felt like a performance, with me trying so hard to bridge the gap between us that I'd made the gap wider instead. After dinner, Carmen showed me the housekeeping supplies and walked me through the basic routine. The inn used high-quality linens and toiletries, and everything had to be spotless for the next guests. She explained the different room types, the preferences of regular guests, the small touches that made the inn special. "The key is attention to detail," she said as we stood in one of the guest rooms. "Elena used to say that people might not consciously notice when things are perfect, but they definitely notice when they're not." My hands, soft from years of office work, felt clumsy as I practiced making hospital corners and folding towels into the neat arrangements guests expected. Carmen was patient, showing me the techniques multiple times until I could approximate the right results. "You'll get it," she assured me as we finished. "It's just muscle memory. Give it a week and you'll be doing this in your sleep." Back in my small room, I unpacked my few belongings and tried to imagine doing this for weeks or months. The idea should have been depressing, but instead I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Anticipation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new skills to master, a chance to prove myself in ways I'd never attempted. I thought about Sarah, probably back in Chicago by now, maybe telling her friends about her impossible mother who'd tried to control her vacation just like she controlled everything else. The thought hurt, but underneath the pain was something else. A tiny spark of defiance that whispered, maybe Sarah wasn't the only one who could make dramatic life changes. My phone, now charged thanks to Miguel lending me a cable, showed 3 missed calls from my sister and a text from my neighbor asking when I'd be back to pick up my mail. The outside world felt distant and unimportant compared to the immediate reality of this place. These people, this chance to become someone different. As I drifted off to sleep, I could hear Miguel playing guitar somewhere below, the melody drifting up through the old house like a lullaby. The last thing I remembered thinking was that Elena had been right about this place having too much love in it for anyone to be truly sad. But I hadn't counted on how much work it would take to rebuild a heart that had been broken by its own stubborn pride. I woke to the sound of rain hammering against my window and the acrid smell of something burning downstairs. My phone showed 5:47 a.m., which meant I'd overslept by 13 minutes on my first day. So much for making a good impression. The burning smell was coming from the kitchen, where Carmen stood staring helplessly at a skillet full of what might have once been scrambled eggs, but now looked like yellow concrete. Smoke hung in the air despite the open windows, and I could hear guests stirring upstairs, probably wondering if they needed to evacuate. "I set the heat too high," Carmen said without looking at me, her voice tight with frustration. "I was trying to get breakfast started early since we have that big checkout this morning, but I can't even manage eggs without destroying them." I moved to the stove and turned off the burner, then opened the back door to help clear the smoke. "It happens to everyone. Let me help." "You don't understand." Carmen's voice cracked slightly. "Elena could cook for 30 people without breaking a sweat. She made it look effortless. I've been trying for over a year to learn her recipes, and I keep failing at the most basic things." I recognized that tone. It was the same one I'd used talking about Sarah, the weight of trying to live up to someone else's standards and falling short every time. "Maybe we're approaching this wrong," I said gently. "Instead of trying to recreate what Elena did, what if we figured out what works for you?" Carmen looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "The guests expect Elena's breakfasts. They've been coming here for years specifically for her blueberry pancakes and homemade sausage." "Then let's start there. Show me her pancake recipe." The handwritten card Carmen pulled from a wooden box was stained with years of use. The ink faded in places. Elena's handwriting was elegant but cryptic, full of measurements like a pinch and until it feels right. No wonder Carmen was struggling. "Okay," I said, studying the recipe. "Let's break this down step by step. When she says, 'fold in blueberries gently,' what do you think that means?" For the next hour, we worked side by side, translating Elena's intuitive cooking into something Carmen could follow. I found myself drawing on skills I hadn't used in years, the same systematic problem-solving that had made me good at my office job. Each step needed to be clear, measurable, repeatable. By 7:30, we had a plate of respectable pancakes, and the kitchen smelled like cinnamon and vanilla instead of smoke. Miguel appeared, drawn by the improved aromas, and actually smiled when he tasted the results. "These are good, Mom. Really good." Carmen's smile was brilliant, the first genuinely happy expression I'd seen from her. Margaret figured out what Elena meant by "fold gently." It's all in the wrist motion. The morning rush was a blur of activity that left my head spinning. 5 rooms checked out between 8 and 10, each one requiring a complete turnaround before the afternoon arrivals. Carmen handled the front desk while I dove into my first real day of housekeeping. My soft office hands weren't prepared for the reality of manual labor. The vacuum cleaner was heavier than I'd expected, the cleaning solutions harsh enough to sting if I splashed them on my skin. By the time I finished the first room, my back ached and my arms felt like rubber. The second room belonged to a family with 2 small children, and it looked like a tornado had hit it. Wet towels on every surface, mysterious sticky spots on the carpet, toys scattered like landmines. I stood in the doorway for a full minute, overwhelmed by the scope of the disaster. "Breathe," I told myself, channeling the same voice I'd used to calm panicked coworkers during office crises. One thing at a time. I started with the bathroom, scrubbing crayon marks off the tub and finding a rubber duck behind the toilet. The bedroom took longer, requiring me to move furniture to reach all the mystery stains. By the time I'd stripped and remade the beds, changed the towels and vacuumed, my shirt was soaked with sweat and my carefully styled hair was a disaster. But the room looked perfect. Better than perfect, actually. I'd arranged the pillows exactly the way Elena's note specified, left fresh flowers from the garden on the nightstand, and even folded the toilet paper into a neat triangle the way fancy hotels did. Carmen appeared in the doorway just as I was finishing. "Oh my God, Margaret, this looks amazing." I felt a ridiculous surge of pride. It took me forever, though. I'm never going to get all 5 rooms done at this rate. "It's your first day." Elena used to say that speed comes with practice, but quality has to be there from the beginning. The afternoon brought 3 new check-ins and a crisis when the hot water heater in the main building started making ominous rumbling noises. Tom disappeared into the basement with a toolbox, emerging 2 hours later covered in rust and looking grim. "It's dying," he announced over dinner. "Probably got another month or 2 in it, but we need to start planning for replacement." Carmen's face went pale. "How much will that cost?" $3,000, maybe 4, depending on what we find when we tear into the plumbing. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken worry. I'd only been here 1 day, but I could already see the financial pressures weighing on this family. The inn was beautiful and well-run, but it wasn't making enough money to handle major repairs easily. "What about a payment plan?" I suggested. "Most contractors will work something out." Tom shook his head. "Already talked to them about the roof repairs we need. They want cash up front, and I don't blame them. Too many small businesses have gone under around here in the past few years." That night, I lay awake thinking about numbers. I had $23,000 in my savings account, money I'd been hoarding for retirement or emergencies. The emergency part of my brain kept insisting this wasn't my problem, that I barely knew these people and shouldn't get involved in their financial troubles. But another part of me, a part that had been growing stronger since I'd walked into that cafe, whispered that maybe this was exactly the kind of problem I was meant to solve. The next few days fell into a rhythm that was both exhausting and strangely satisfying. My hands developed blisters, then calluses. My back stopped aching quite so much. I learned the quirks of each room, the preferences of regular guests, the small touches that made people feel welcome. Mrs. Henderson in room 3 always requested extra pillows and left handwritten thank you notes. The young couple in room 7 were on their honeymoon and barely noticed anything beyond each other. The traveling salesman who came through every 2 weeks liked his towels folded in thirds instead of halves and always tipped exactly $2. Carmen and I developed an easy partnership in the kitchen, with me translating Elena's recipes into step-by-step instructions she could follow. We conquered pancakes, then moved on to muffins, quiche, and the famous breakfast sausage that was apparently Elena's secret recipe. She never wrote down the spice mixture, Carmen explained as we experimented with different combinations of sage and thyme. Said it was all about tasting as you go. Miguel often joined us for these cooking sessions, his guitar leaning against the kitchen counter while he sampled our attempts and offered surprisingly sophisticated feedback. He had his grandmother's palate, it turned out, and could detect when we were missing a crucial ingredient. "Needs more heat," he said, after trying our latest sausage attempt. "Not spicy hot, but warm spices, like nutmeg maybe." It was during one of these experimental cooking sessions that I found the letters. I was cleaning out a cabinet to make room for our growing collection of recipe cards when my hand brushed against something taped to the back panel. Hidden behind a false back were dozens of letters tied with blue ribbon, their paper yellowed with age. The top letter was addressed to "My darling Elena," in elegant handwriting, postmarked 1962. My heart started racing as I realized what I'd found. These weren't just any letters, they were love letters, hidden away like a secret. I should have put them back immediately, should have respected Elena's privacy even after her death. But the first few lines were visible through the thin paper, and they were so beautiful, so full of longing and poetry, that I couldn't help reading further. "I dream of dancing with you under the stars, of building a life together in some small town where everyone knows our story and smiles when they see us walking hand in hand down Main Street." The letters told a story of young love interrupted by war, of promises made and broken, of a choice between security and passion. Elena had been engaged to someone else when she met the letter writer, a musician who'd come through town with a traveling band. The letters chronicled their secret courtship, her agonizing decision, and ultimately his departure when she chose duty over love. The last letter was different, written in Elena's handwriting and never sent. "My dearest James, I think of you every day, wonder what our life might have been. I chose safely, and I've built a good life here. But sometimes, when I hear music drifting from the square, I close my eyes and imagine it's you playing. Imagine you've come back for me after all these years." I sat on the kitchen floor, surrounded by these intimate pieces of someone else's life, and cried for Elena, for James, for the road not taken. I cried for my own choices, for the ways I'd let fear and practicality guide me instead of following my heart. "Margaret? What's wrong?" Carmen's voice startled me. She was standing in the doorway with Miguel behind her, both looking concerned. I held up the letters, unsure how to explain what I'd found. "I'm sorry. I was cleaning the cabinet and found these. I shouldn't have read them, but they're so beautiful and so sad." Carmen knelt beside me and carefully took one of the letters, her eyes widening as she read. "I never knew," she whispered. "Mom never said anything about another man. She loved your father," I said quickly, not wanting to tarnish Carmen's memories. "The letters make that clear. But she loved this James too, in a different way." Miguel was reading over his mother's shoulder, his young face serious. "Is that why she kept them? Because even though she chose Grandpa, she didn't want to forget?" "I think so. Sometimes love doesn't fit into neat categories. Sometimes you love someone for who they help you become, and someone else for who you were before the world told you who you had to be." Carmen was quiet for a long moment, studying her mother's handwriting. She used to get sad sometimes when she heard certain songs. Dad never understood why, but she'd just get this distant look and go quiet for hours. We spent the evening reading through all the letters, piecing together Elena and James's story. There were photos, too, hidden behind the letters. A young Elena dancing with a dark-haired man who looked nothing like Tom, the same man sitting on the inn's front porch with a guitar, Miguel's current spot. "He stayed here," Miguel said, his voice awed. "My great-grandmother was already running the inn then. He stayed here and fell in love with Grandma." It explained so much about Elena's devotion to the inn, her attention to creating a place where people felt loved and welcomed. She'd been trying to recreate the magic of those few weeks when everything had seemed possible. That night, I dreamed about choices and roads not taken. I dreamed about Sarah, about all the times I'd chosen controlling her over understanding her. I dreamed about my own life, the safe choices I'd made, the dreams I'd abandoned in favor of security and respectability. I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years, Elena had made her choice and built a beautiful life from it, but she'd also kept those letters as a reminder that love comes in many forms, that passion and safety don't have to be mutually exclusive. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Tom found me in the laundry room, wrestling with fitted sheets that seemed determined to fight back, his face serious. "I got a call from a development company," he said without preamble. "They want to buy the inn." My hands stilled on the sheets. "For how much?" "Enough to pay off the mortgage, replace the hot water heater, and have money left over for retirement." Tom's voice was carefully neutral, but I could hear the exhaustion underneath. "They want to tear it down and build condos." "What did you tell them?" "That I'd think about it. Carmen's struggling, Miguel's got college coming up, and I'm getting too old to keep up with all the repairs this place needs." He ran a hand through his silver hair. "Maybe it's time to admit I can't do this without Elena." But I could see it wasn't what he wanted. This place was Elena's legacy, their shared dream made real. Selling to developers would erase everything they'd built together. "What if there was another option?" I asked carefully. "Like what?" I took a deep breath, feeling like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, about to jump. "What if someone invested in the inn, became a partner instead of an employee?" Tom studied my face. "You talking about yourself?" "I have savings, enough to cover the immediate repairs, and maybe some marketing to bring in more guests, in exchange for a percentage of the business." It was crazy. I'd known these people for less than a week. I had no experience in hospitality, no guarantee this investment would pay off. But I also knew that walking away would mean watching something beautiful get destroyed, and I'd had enough of standing by while things I cared about slipped away. "Why would you do that?" Tom asked. I thought about Elena's letters, about the courage it takes to choose love over fear. Because sometimes the biggest risk is not taking one. Because I've spent 62 years playing it safe, and I'm tired of wondering what might have been. Tom was quiet for a long moment, studying my face like he was trying to read my soul. Finally, he nodded. "Let me talk to Carmen and Miguel. If they're on board, we'll discuss terms." That afternoon, Sarah called. I was in the garden, pulling weeds and trying to identify the herbs Elena had planted, when my phone rang. For a moment, I considered not answering. Our last conversation had ended so badly, and I wasn't sure I was ready to hear her voice. But she was still my daughter, and despite everything, I loved her. "Mom?" Her voice was small, uncertain. "I've been thinking about what happened, about what I said." "I've been thinking too," I said, settling onto a wooden bench between the basil and rosemary. "You were right about a lot of things." I was angry. "I said some things I probably shouldn't have." "You said some things I needed to hear." I watched a butterfly land on the marigolds, its wings bright orange against the green foliage. "I'm sorry, Sarah, for trying to control your life, for not listening when you tried to tell me what you needed." There was a long pause. "Where are you?" "I called your neighbor and she said you haven't been home." "I'm still in Millbrook. I got a job at a bed and breakfast." "You what?" Sarah's voice shot up an octave. "Mom, what are you talking about? You don't know how to do that kind of work." I laughed, a sound that surprised me with its lightness. "I'm learning. Turns out I'm pretty good at making beds and organizing linen closets. Who knew?" "This is crazy. You need to come home. We need to talk properly, work things out." "We are talking. And as for coming home..." I paused, watching Miguel appear on the back porch with his guitar. "I'm not sure where home is right now." "Mom, you're scaring me." "Don't be scared, sweetheart. I'm figuring some things out, that's all. Important things I should have figured out years ago." We talked for another 20 minutes. Really talked in a way we hadn't in years. I told her about the inn, about the family I was living with, about finding Elena's letters and learning to cook from recipes written with love instead of precision. She told me about the pottery class she'd signed up for, about the promotion she was hoping for at work, about the man she'd been dating who made her laugh. "I miss you," she said as we were ending the call. "But you sound different. Happier, maybe?" "I'm working on it." After we hung up, I sat in the garden until the sun started setting, thinking about the conversation. about the choices ahead of me. Miguel's music drifted from the porch, a new song I hadn't heard before, complex and beautiful and full of hope. When I finally went inside, Tom and Carmen were waiting in the kitchen with papers spread across the table. Partnership agreements, business plans, financial projections. The paperwork that would make my crazy impulse into legal reality. "You sure about this?" Carmen asked as I sat down at the table. "It's a big commitment." I thought about Elena's letters, about love and choices and the courage it takes to build something beautiful. I thought about Sarah's voice on the phone, warm and understanding in a way it hadn't been in years. I thought about my soft hands that were growing calloused and strong, about morning conversations over pancake batter and evening guitar music drifting through old walls. "I'm sure," I said, and picked up the pen. 6 months later, the Mountain View Inn was thriving. We'd replaced the hot water heater, fixed the roof, and launched a website that brought in guests from 3 states. Carmen had mastered Elena's entire recipe collection and added a few of her own. Miguel was saving money for music school by playing weekend concerts in the gazebo downtown. And I was Margaret Walsh, co-owner of a bed and breakfast, woman who'd learned that sometimes the best decisions are the ones that scare you most. Sarah visited for a week in spring, helping with the garden and learning to make Elena's famous blueberry muffins. She met Miguel and declared his music absolutely amazing, charmed Tom with questions about the inn's restoration, and spent hours talking with Carmen about the courage it takes to start over. On her last night, we sat on the front porch where it all started, rocking in the same chairs where Tom had offered me a job that changed my life. "I'm proud of you, Mom," Sarah said quietly, "for taking this risk, for becoming someone new." "I'm not someone new," I said, watching the lights come on in the town below us. "I'm just finally someone true." Elena had been right about this place having too much love in it for anyone to be truly sad. But what she hadn't mentioned was how much courage it takes to accept that love, to believe you deserve it, to let it change you into the person you were always meant to be. The sound of Miguel's guitar drifted from inside, playing a song about second chances and roads that lead you home. And for the first time in 62 years, I knew exactly where I belonged.